Hello, everyone, and welcome to our DEIB and IAT presentation. We hope you have been enjoying the summit so far. We are extremely excited to share with you all of our slides today. Adonis and I are here to tell you more about DEIB, as well as introduce you to the IAT. Alrighty, so here's our agenda for our summit presentation today. We will begin with some brief introductions to share with you all a little bit about us. We are then going to begin talking and going into more detail about what is DEIB, and as well as resources you and your chapter can utilize. And for our DEIB related topics, we are going to focus on our national ALD website, as this is a great source officers can make use of for the ALD community. Next, we're going to talk more about and show everyone the national ALD DEIB calendar that includes various awareness days, weeks, and months. Then we're going to talk about implicit bias and go into depth about what that may look like. And lastly, we're going to introduce the implicit bias test. We will now begin with some introductions. So hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Ham, and I am associated with the ALD chapter for California State University, Monterey Bay. My position in ALD consists of vice president and secretary, and I'm also the DEIB intern for National ALD. My majors consist of psychology and human development family sciences. I also have a minor in pre-law, and some of my interests include drawing, painting, volunteer work, and going outdoors.
Hello, everyone. I'm Adonis Hughes. I am the advisor for the CSUMB Monterey chapter. I'm also a member of the board of directors for ALD. Last time I was in college, my major was student personnel, and my hobbies and interests, volunteering, the aquarium, which is my background, and actually where I would have been today if I wasn't here. Like movies, have volunteered at some movies, some film festivals. Also, I've driven across country 7 times and probably stopped in your state.
Alrighty, now we are going to talk about DEIB. And now some of you may be curious as to what DEIB stands for and what DEIB may look like. So DEIB stands for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And diversity is the practice of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and different genders. Equity is the quality of being fair and impartial. Inclusion is the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. And lastly, belonging is the need for a close relationship within a group and a desire to be a part of something greater than oneself. Now we're going to dive into some resources. And as mentioned previously, we're going to utilize the DEIB page on our National ALD website. So located on our website, you'll find many resources related to DEIB. On our website, you will see guidelines for DEIB related discussions. This can help create a safe and respectful space when communicating amongst each other. We have an ALD webinar on how to help your chapter celebrate diversity. There's also DEIB training for your chapter, which includes definitions and ways to incorporate DEIB related activities during meetings or events. We also have social media posts, videos, podcasts. There are many more resources located on our website that you all can explore to help celebrate DEIB in your chapter. And now we are going to move forward with the ALD DEIB 2023 calendar. So ALD has created a calendar of various DEIB months, weeks, and days. We have also included ideas for celebrating DEIB related events. We also wanted to mention that this calendar is not all encompassing. Sorry. We encourage you to celebrate all diversity events that are meaningful to you. This calendar is superb for officers to utilize, as members in their chapter may be associated with one of the awareness days, weeks, months, etc. on that calendar. This is great to spread awareness and advocate for your chapter, as well as provide belonging and inclusion in an educational setting.
Okay, now to implicit bias. And I'm going to start off with a video. Hopefully you can see and hear this.
Implicit bias exists when we unconsciously hold attitudes towards others or associate stereotypes with them. For example, we often harbor negative stereotypes about others without consciously realizing that we do so. Implicit bias, which is also called unconscious bias or implicit social cognition, is a prejudice that is deep-seated within the brain, below the conscious level. Studies have demonstrated implicit bias against racial groups, genders, LGBTQ, and other marginalized groups. We may even be prejudiced against our own group, although we tend to favor our in-group with positive stereotypes and disfavor out-groups with negative stereotypes.
The immediate feeling you get or the immediate thoughts you have about a person, an assumption you feel, just anything you feel really stems somewhere from an experience you've had or your upbringing.
Depends on the region you're from, the country you're from, the background you grew up in. That shapes the person's unconscious bias.
I think sometimes you don't even realize it, but your own actions, maybe the way you treat others as opposed to treating others that look like you or that act like you or that are your friends.
Implicit bias often runs counter to people's conscious, expressed beliefs. Few physicians espouse racially discriminatory views, and yet doctors tend to recommend less pain medication for black patients than for white patients with the identical injury. In other words, people can be explicitly unbiased, yet implicitly biased, according to psychologist Daniel Kelly and colleagues.
One of my closest friends since high school, we've worked on a lot of projects together, we've been in a lot of classes together. Sometimes we'd be working together in a group project, for example, and she would say stuff like, oh, you're good at math, you're good at science, here, you can take this part of the project or something. I don't hold it against her or anything, and she doesn't mean any harm by it, but obviously there's that implicit sort of bias or stereotype that Asians are better at math and science.
Implicit bias has been found in a large array of studies using various tests, but much of the evidence for the phenomenon comes from Harvard University's Project Implicit website, home of the Implicit Association Test, or the IAT. Literally millions of people have visited this site and taken various tests that ask them to respond rapidly to questions that require them to associate blacks or whites, males or females, or young or old, etc., with positive or negative words.
Most of the implicit biases that I've run into are probably positive ones, things that come with being a white male and having height and having a good voice and things like that.
Professor Nosek and colleagues tested more than 700,000 subjects and found that more than 70% of white subjects more easily associated white faces with positive words and black faces with negative words, concluding that this was evidence of implicit racial bias. In fact, additional evidence indicates that measures of implicit bias better predict people's conduct than measures of explicit bias.
I think that if you are anyone, to be blunt, that it's not a white male, you potentially feel that implicit bias. Maybe you're just looking for someone that is like you because you like you, and so you want to be around more people like you. But what's really rooted under that is that you potentially don't think that someone else is as smart or as capable, and that is coming from a place of implicit bias.
Now here's some good news. Various scientists have criticized the IAT. They point out, for example, that individuals who take the test on different dates often score substantially differently. Even IAT supporters admit that implicit bias, at least as demonstrated by the test, is widespread but relatively minor and has only a small impact upon people's real-world actions. In other words, the results of the test are not strong enough to predict particular behaviors by individual people. However, let's not get too comfortable. Even if the IAT cannot predict the future conduct of any one individual on a given occasion, it still indicates how groups of people will act on average, and that is worrisome. For example, few people openly advocate for discrimination in hiring, but white applicants receive 50% more responses from potential employers than do black applicants with the same resume. Likewise, college professors are substantially more likely to answer student emails if the students' names indicate that they are probably white than if the names sound like they belong to black students. And in one study, online course instructors were 94% more likely to respond to discussion posts by white male students than by other students.
There are a lot of opportunities to promote people within the workplace. It doesn't happen because of different biases. People assume, a woman is of a certain age or they're married and you think, oh, she's going to want to have kids, so we're not going to give her this really tough, big project.
When I graduated from West Point in 2009, I went to my first organization, the first unit assignment. I was the only Latino officer in a group of about 100 other officers. Yeah, I think there was a lot of hesitation in really following my lead as the leader for the organization. I think it hindered in some way the ability for us to build cohesive trust within our organization and really have that going into a combat environment.
Because implicit bias operates at a mostly unconscious level, it is difficult for individuals to overcome. No existing training regime has proven particularly effective at debiasing implicit bias. But, fortunately, some research shows that stereotypes can be unlearned, and that safeguards can be put in place to minimize their impact. For example, women used to make up only a relatively small percentage of the musicians in orchestras. But when orchestras began holding blind auditions, where the applicants played behind a curtain and their genders were unknown to the judges, the percentage of women chosen to play in symphony orchestras doubled. Perhaps we can put a dent in implicit bias after all.
These biases are sometimes so deep-rooted within us or within our culture that we don't even realize that they are biases.
We could have a mutually, beneficial conversation and really benefit from learning from each other and really understand that we're all not that different.
Listen, really absorb the experiences of those around you, especially those who come from backgrounds that are unlike yours.
Learn something new about a person, and then that will kind of help shift that bias, because now you've actually ask that person, or now you get to know that person.
There's so many opportunities to engage with others, to say, I don't want to do this again. Can you help me not do that? And people are willing to have those conversations.
Okay, as a follow-up, a part two, for the blind auditions, actually women had to be advised not to wear heels because the click of the heels revealed their gender to subsequent judge bias. And also with regard to the resumes, I'm on a search committee right now, and the system we're using when we're evaluating resumes, we don't see the name, we just see the sections of their resume. So that would help eliminate name and gender bias at times. So there are ways to work around it. In light of this, you should review your chapter processes to see if there's any areas that may be influenced by implicit bias, the types of events and programs offered, and officer selection process are two possible areas to consider. Let's go. So for Project Implicit, there are two universities involved in the project. There were two others, University of Virginia, University of Washington. The slide kind of gives them a shout out because you always see that it's the Harvard implicit bias test, but other universities were involved. So with the implicit association test, the mission of Project Implicit is to educate the public about bias and provide a virtual laboratory for collecting data on the internet. Project Implicit scientists produce high impact research that forms the basis of our scientific knowledge about bias and disparities. With this, I wanted to, if you would put in the chat what your experience has been. Is this the first time you've heard it today? Have you heard about implicit bias in the IAT? Have you taken a test? If you would take a second and type your experience with IAT in the chat, Jessica will read them out.
All right, so someone has heard of implicit bias, but has not heard of the test. That's a very common feature with this. Oh, and reverse too. Someone has heard about IAT, but has never has. Oh, they've learned about implicit bias. Oh, I apologize. Okay, so my sorority has talked a lot about IAT, as we do have people of all different backgrounds. I think it is super important in the world we live in. Yes, definitely agree. I never heard of it. I have heard of it, but learned about it more today. Awesome. And we're super happy that you guys are able to learn about it more. And if you have heard about it, brush up upon it more. It's super important for your chapter and for diversity in workplace settings, educational settings.
So we're sharing the test site with you. I think it's going to drop into the chat if it hasn't already. And as you'll see when you open it, there are 16 different tests across a variety of areas. As mentioned in the video, you kind of need to weigh your individual interpretation. I personally attribute the differing scores to recent experience. You might have heard something positive or negative involving the group in the news from friends, or may have had a personal interaction with someone in a specific group, and that's going to change your bias, either positive or negative. I've taken a few of the tests and I was able to gain some insight into why a positive bias was positive. And for another one, I was able to take some steps to change behavior towards a group that came up slightly negative, because that made me conscious of my implicit bias. Essentially, this information is another tool in your toolbox should you run into a situation that's bias related. We want to thank you for your time and find out if there's any final questions or thoughts.